After a 51-day standoff with David Koresh's Branch Davidian cult, the FBI raided the cult's compound. By the time the smoke cleared, only fire-ravaged bodies, a few survivors, and countless questions about the way authorities handled the siege remained. The dramatic end of the Waco siege meant that David Koresh's Branch Davidians are now considered one of the most dangerous cults in recent history. However, the actual death toll of the siege remains unclear.
The FBI underestimated the charismatic control that David Koresh had over this faith community.
9 Branch Davidians escaped the fire, and the initial investigations turned up 72 bodies. However, Koresh stated before his death that there were a total of 95 people in the building. Whether he was inflating the numbers or not is uncertain. Assuming his count was correct, this means that 14 bodies were never found in the rubble, a possibility investigators accounted for by stating that the fire may have completely consumed some of the human remains.
Minutes before setting out on the raid, the ATF learned from an undercover agent that Koresh knew they were coming.
It's also unclear whether some of the accounts of the dead include the 4 ATF agents who died in an earlier gunfight. Today, when an outlet gives an exact number of adults and children who died in the fire, it's most likely to say 75, but many reports still play it safe by keeping things vague. The way authorities handled the Waco situation drew a lot of criticism, although it was eventually concluded that the Branch Davidians themselves set the compound on fire.
Well, he'd been saying for such a long time that they were going to come for us. And then they did.
One line of investigation involved the FBI's copious use of CS gas, which is basically a tear gas, in an effort to flush the cultists out of the building. Some have theorized that the FBI's hours-long tear gas barrage may have hindered the Branch Davidians' ability to escape the compound once the fire started. This theory makes sense, as CS gas releases cyanide when exposed to fire.
The Davidians had gas masks, but of course the FBI knew that there are no gas masks for children.
Despite this, a medical examination of the Branch Davidians' remains found that CS gas played no part in their death. Instead, many victims died from asphyxiation, gunshots, either self-inflicted or from fellow Branch Davidians, or blunt force trauma caused by pieces of the crumbling building falling on them.
The tanks had done so much destruction, and there was just so much debris, you could not have gotten down the hallway.
While the FBI has been cleared of wrongdoing during the Waco siege, their attempt to flush out the cultists with extreme amounts of tear gas had to have been a harrowing experience.
They issued the command over the radio to deploy the gas, and away we went.
Surviving Branch Davidian Clive Doyle testified in court saying, "I saw people in the chapel who had short sleeves on trying to rub it off. They were crying. It was like battery acid on their skin." Even before the siege ended, it was fairly clear that the Branch Davidian group was a pretty bad place for a child. Allegations of indoctrination and outright child abuse had been made against Koresh by authorities and survivors alike, and children who made it out of the compound before the fire had trouble adjusting to normal life.
He was hard on me about everything, down to the spankings, with a really big paddle.
However, the events of April 19, 1993 took things from bad to worse. Though the cult released many children during the siege, the bodies of 25 children were found in the aftermath of the fire. When autopsies were performed on 21 adult and adolescent Branch Davidians who died in the siege, authorities discovered that they'd all died violently, but not from the fire. Instead, 20 victims had been shot to death by fellow cultists. The 21st body was that of a 3-year-old who'd been fatally stabbed. Cult leader David Koresh died during the events of April 19, 1993. His badly burned remains were found 3 days after the fire, but like many other Branch Davidians, the flames didn't kill him. Instead, an examination found a bullet wound in his forehead. The actual details of Koresh's death remain a mystery, but it's worth noting that he was unarmed at the time of his death. The FBI has put forward a theory that Koresh's right-hand man, Steve Schneider, shot him, possibly after catching Koresh trying to escape the burning compound and coming to a conclusion that the leader he trusted was a fraud. Regardless of what actually happened, Schneider also died of gunshot wounds. His body and a rifle were found close to Koresh's remains. After the investigation, Koresh's body was released to his family, who buried him in an unmarked grave at Memorial Park Cemetery in Tyler, Texas. Only 4 people were present. According to the Los Angeles Times, however, some relatives suspected the body they were given might not actually have been Koresh at all. His mother, Bonnie Haldeman, said, "I don't think I will ever rest in my heart. I didn't get to see the body, and I'm not even positive that is David there. Who knows?" Apart from the Branch Davidians who died in the Waco siege, several government agents also perished. On February 28, 1993, ATF Special Agents Todd McKeon, Robert Williams, Conway LeBlue, and Stephen Willis died in the initial fierce gunfight between government agents and cult members. Another 28 agents were also injured during the siege.
The ATF did not understand that what the Davidians were going to see pulling up was the army of Babylon.
ATF held a joint memorial for the four fallen agents at the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial in Washington, D.C. on May 23, 1993, and there is a cenotaph stone at the ATF Mount Carmel Siege Memorial in Texas. As for the actual bodies, they're buried in different locations. McKeon's grave is at the Happy Valley Memorial Park in Carter County, Tennessee, and Williams is buried at Brandon Memorial Gardens in Rankin County, Mississippi. LeBleu was laid to rest in his native Lake Charles, Louisiana, and Willis's final resting place is in Houston, Texas. Some of the Branch Davidians who died in the siege were claimed and buried by their families. Notably, 24 of the cultists were from the UK, and at least some of them, such as Stephen and Philip Henry, received a proper burial and funeral service on home soil. Unfortunately, some of the bodies were burnt beyond recognition and couldn't be identified. For example, the Henrys' funeral also served as a memorial for their mother and three sisters, who also died at the compound.
We knew it was a cult. We would joke about it all the time, like, yep, we're cult members.
Around 30 of the bodies were unidentified or unclaimed. These bodies were kept in storage until late 1994, both because authorities considered using them as evidence and because some victims' lawyers wanted further tests to determine the cause of death. Ultimately, these victims were buried in paupers' graves not too far from where they died, at Restland Cemetery in Waco, Texas.
David's biggest failure was the fact that the kids were not released during the siege at some point. These kids never had a chance.
In recent years, surviving Branch Davidians and relatives of the dead have begun pushing for DNA testing and relocation of those remains. In 2021, 10 of the unidentified bodies, including some of Koresh's closest family members, were moved to nearby Rosamond Cemetery at the request of one prominent Branch Davidian's son. If you or someone you know may be the victim of child abuse, is dealing with spiritual abuse, is struggling, or in crisis, help is available. Contact the relevant resources below. The Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4A-CHILD, 1-800-422-4453, or contact their live chat services. The National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. You can also find more information, resources, and support at their website. Call or text 988 or chat 988lifeline.org.